So let's proceed with our last set of topics for Seminar 1. We will be tackling the first part of hematology. Our outline for today will be RBC and WBC, anatomy and physiology. Okay? So first, hematopoiesis muna tayo. And from the name, takil natin ang name, hemato means blood, poiesis means production. So basically, production of blood cells. And not only that, but also the proliferation, differentiation, and maturation. Yan yung minememorize natin yung mga stages of blood cells. Okay? And meron tayong mga phases of hematopoiesis which actually start in neonatal period or nasa loob ka pa lang ng womb ni mother. Okay? The first stage is mesoblastic stage, which happens on the 19th day, age of gestation to in actually dun sa yolk sac. And dito sa stage na to, nagagawa ang mga embryogenic hemoglobin such as your BOHR1, Part1, and BOHR2. I-recall din natin mamaya kung ano yung mga combination of alpha of globin chains which make up this type of embryogenic hemoglobins. And then next, after mesoblastic stage, magpo-proceed na kayo with hepatic stage kasi well-formed na si fetal liver and it will happen at the 3rd month of age of gestation. And this stage, napo-form na si fetal hemoglobin which is the most predominant hemoglobin at this stage. And then lesser amount na lang muna si adult hemoglobin and the minor adult hemoglobin which is hemoglobin A2. And sa myeloid stage tayo, napo-form na yung blood cells mismo sa bone marrow. BM is bone marrow. Okay? And it starts at the 5th to 6th month age of gestation. Yung ating mga hemoglobins F, A1, A2 is still persistent up to the myeloid stage. So cellularity, kung makikita natin no, yung stages of hematopoiesis inside the mother's womb, itong yellow part, no? Umpisa tayo with yolk sac. Ano ulit ang name? Mesoblastic. Tapos sa liver, hepatic. And lesser amounts, makikita mo, meron ding responsibility sa hematopoiesis si spleen. And then sa 3rd stage, yung ating myeloid stage, ay ito na yung predominant hanggang sa mapanganak ka na. Okay? And then, dito sa ating after delivery of the baby, very active na sila, vertebra, sternum, yan, ribs, femur, tibia, and a little amount of lymph node. Dapat little amount lang yan. In cases of lymphoma, nahihigitan niya lahat ng mga bone or blood cell producing bones. So, abnormal yon. Dapat lesser amount lang. Kapag more than that, nagkakaroon na ng lymphoma. Dito tayo sa, again, no, yung mga stages natin ng ating hematopoiesis. And after birth, yung nga, bone marrow na lang dapat ang nagpo-produce. Hindi liver at hindi yung spleen. And then, dito naman sa globin chains, okay, predominant nung before birth is yung epsilon, zeta, gamma, alpha, okay, and a little bit of beta, and delta. Okay. And after birth, persistent na lang sila, alpha, beta, and a little bit of delta. Si gamma ay pabagsak na. Remember, gamma is a part of your fetal hemoglobin. Okay, dito tayo sa hemoglobin structures which make up the embryogenic hemoglobins. Umpisahan natin si GOER1. GOER1 is composed of 2 zeta, 2 epsilon. Ang mnemonics namin dati, no, ones. Tama lang yung Z ng C ng Z. Okay. Part1 naman, 2 zeta, 2 gamma. Ang mnemonics is Ziga ang Portland. Back in our days, ang Portland is a type of construction material. And then GOER2, 2 alpha and 2 epsilon. So, ang mnemonics namin dati is TAE. 2, ang first letter is T, di ba? And then A, E. And then hemoglobin F, composed of your 2 alpha and 2 gamma. Predominant lang yan sa fetus, hindi yan persistent until after birth. And hemoglobin A1 is the major adult hemoglobin composed of your 2 alpha and 2 beta. Hemoglobin A2, 2 alpha and 2 delta. And this is the minor adult hemoglobin. Okay, globin structures naman tayo. Iba-iba yan. Alpha, beta, and so on. And kung tatandaan natin number of amino acids, lahat 146 except alpha, zeta, and theta. Theta is actually, pinag-aaralan pa rin yan. So, unknown pa rin yung number of amino acids sa mga yan. Okay? Lahat 146 except alpha, zeta, and theta. Sa chromosome number naman, lahat makikita in chromosome 11 except alpha, 16 yan, zeta, 16, theta, and at chromosome 16. So, madaling tandaan, lahat, lagi ang exception dyan is alpha, zeta, and theta. Okay, dito tayo sa mga cells of hematopoiesis. Actually, bago yung ating actual na memorization of the stages of the cells, meron pang mas younger than that. No? Ang youngest of all is the stem cells. Stem cells is also known as pluripotential or multipotential cells dahil ito ay kaya mag-differentiate or mag-mature into more than one cell line. So, pwede siyang pumunta sa erythropoiesis, granulopoiesis, monocytopoiesis, mga ganyan. Non-specific pa si stem cell. Kaya ang pangalan niya ay pluri or multipotential. Okay? Si progenitor cells naman ay tinatawag na unipotential. Uni means one. So, only one cell line ang kaya niyang i-produce. And then, si precursor cells, ito ang mga stages na i-memorize natin usually. And this is also known as immature or blast cells. And it can only differentiate into one specific cell. So, under microscope, no, ang stem cells and progenitor cells cannot be recognized unless done with special staining or done with special microscope technique. Okay? Ang recognizable lang natin is yung mga precursor cells and the mature cells. Dito tayo with RBC maturation muna. There are rules na kailangan sundin ng mga precursor cells in order to produce a functional and well-matured RBC. Okay? Number 1 rule is that each of the cell will reduce its size as it ages or as it matures. Okay? And then, second, the amount of cytoplasm will increase as it matures and the amount of nucleus decreases until it disappears. Diba? Remember, yung ating mature RBC, wala siyang nucleus. And ang amount of cytoplasm and nucleus can be done by taking its ratio. Meron tayong tinatawag na NC ratio or in other books, CN ratio. C means the cytoplasm, N is the nucleus. As cell matures NC ratio decreases, di ba? Dahil ang nucleus will decrease and until it finally disappear. And then CN ratio increases naman dahil yung amount of cytoplasm kailangan mag-increase. Okay? Depende yan sa question kung NC ratio ba or CN ratio ang tinatanong. Number 3, staining reaction of cytoplasm changes from blue to pinkish. Ano yung nagpapa-blue ba dun sa ating cytoplasm? It is the amount of the RNA. Ang RNA, it is produced by or it is found in the nucleus. Diba? As it matures, nababawasan and nawawala. Kung nawala na yung nucleus, mawawala na yung blue color of the cytoplasm and it will be converted into pinkish red dahil sa combination of your hemoglobin with oxygen. Ayan. Ma-appreciate natin dito sa picture na to yung ating NC ratio or CN ratio, right? And kung susundin natin yung rules of RBC maturation, as it matures, lumiliit, yung cytoplasm, yung amount ng cytoplasm dito, konti pa lang, parami niyan ng parami. Okay? As compared to the nucleus, lumiliit and then hanggang sa mawala na. Cytoplasm naman from blue, magiging violet, multicolored, hanggang sa maging pink. Okay. Dito tayo with erythropoiesis. Meron tayong tinatawag na erythropoietin. And this is the major hormone for RBC production. And it is produced by the kidneys. Majority of the levels. Some of them can be produced in the liver. Pero some in little amount. Okay? And the primary stimulus for production of this hormone is called hypoxia. Ano bang ibig sabihin ng hypoxia? Kapag ang tissue mo na-detect na meron siyang decreased levels of oxygen, okay, magsasend yan ng signal to the kidney to produce erythropoietin and then pupunta yan sa bone marrow to produce eventually RBC cells. Or RBC cells, redundant na yan. Anyway, average lifespan, syempre, alam nyo na yan, magmula first year, 120 days. Average size is 6 to 8 micrometer. And etong size na to, kasing size niya yung mga capillaries. And capillaries are the smallest blood vessels. So, kahit pinakamaliliit na capillaries, kaya lumusot ni RBC to give oxygenation for your tissues. So, let's proceed with the stages of erythropoiesis. So, iba-iba ang name per book. Okay? So, dapat memorize din natin yung other names ng bawat isa. So, first stage is the pronormoblast or proerythroblast or rubriblast. Next stage, basophilic normoblast or basophilic erythroblast or prorubricite. Next stage naman, polychromatic or polychromatophilic. May makikita kayong ganyan sa mga books. Normoblast, erythroblast, or rubricite. Orthochromic normoblast, orthochromic erythroblast, meta-rubricite. Meta means next. No? So, hindi kayo magpapalito dito. Polychromatic o polychromatophilic erythrocyte na tayo. Kamukha niya ang name nito, right? Pero dito, erythrocyte kasi pa-next stage na siya. Then, dito, reticulocyte. Then, last, ang mga other names for erythrocyte, either mature RBC or discocyte. So, wag lang kayo magpapalito dito sa second to fourth stage. Tandaan lang natin yung mnemonics na BPO. Mauuna si basophilic, bago ang polychromatophilic, and then orthochromic, normoblast, or erythroblast. Okay? Wag tayo magpapalito doon sa second to the last stage. Ang erythrocyte ang end name niya kasi malapit na siya dun sa next mature RBC. Okay, description naman ng bawat isa. Pronormoblast is the first recognizable stage dahil ang mga progenitor and stem cell are not recognizable. And this is the first stage to be recognized under microscope. Basophilic normoblast, dito ang umpisa ng hemoglobin synthesis according to Rodak. Okay? Dito ang start, and ang last stage supposedly ng hemoglobin synthesis is your polychromatophilic erythrocyte. Lundag lang ako dito, right? Kasi ang presence of RNA is the basis of the production of your hemoglobin. So up to this stage kasi meron pa rin tayong mga konting reticulum, kaya ang tawag din dito is reticulocyte dahil dun sa presence of reticulum na makikita sa mga RNA. Okay? Balik tayo dito. Polychromatophilic normoblast is the last stage capable of mitosis. Ano ba yung mitosis? Cell division. Ito, kaya pa niya mag-cell divide. And this stage, ma-appreciate mo si checkerboard pattern. Lumilitaw yan sa boards. Okay? Ito yung cell na may, mamaya papakita ko yung checkerboard appearance nito. And then next, yung orthochromic normoblast, youngest incapable of mitosis. So, wag tayo magpapalito dun sa dalawang ito, no? And then, ito rin yung last na may nucleus pa, si RBC. And ano ang appearance niya? Sunny side up, egg appearance. And then, yun nga, and dito sa reticulocyte, it can only be recognized by using supravital stain. Kasi halos kamukha niya sa erythrocyte. Ang difference lang is the presence of the reticulum, which can only be stained using your supravital stain, specifically your NMB or new methylene blue stain. So, ang laging tanong dito sa part na to, no, ano yung ganitong pattern, no, checkerboard, sunny side up, youngest stage incapable, last stage capable of mitosis, ano yung mga stages capable of hemoglobin synthesis, no, tatandaan natin yung mga ganyan. Kasi medyo nakakalito if ever ma-meet niyo sila sa board exam question. So, dito tayo sa ating pictures. Yung ma-appreciate natin yung spotted or checkerboard appearance. Ano bang ibig sabihin ng checkerboard appearance? Di ba may white, may black, part of the, or alternating black and white. So dito, no, makikita nyo alternating stained and unstained parts of the nucleus. Ito ay polychromatophilic normoblast. Dito naman tayo, sunny side up. Prominent yan sa orthochromic normoblast. So, dito naman tayo sa contents of the RBC membrane. Unahin natin itong first column. Kung mapapansin nyo, the majority of the content is made up of proteins, next lipids, and little amount of carbohydrate. Unahin natin yung mga protein content, and it is classified as integral protein and peripheral protein. Di-discuss natin tom later on, no? Kung ano yung basic roles and importance nila in keeping the RBC membrane intact or stable. Well, for now, no, tandaan lang natin yung integral protein for integration with other RBC, no, for communication yan. Peripheral protein, basically, lahat ng yan to maintain the shape of the RBC. Ano ba ang normal shape ng RBC? It is biconcave and ang size niya is 6 to 8 micrometer. Lipid content naman, pwede mo sila i-classify according to their location. Sa external surface, meron tayong phosphatidylcholine, glycolipid, and sphingomyelin. Sa loob naman, phosphatidyl ethanolamine, inositol, and serine. Ang basic rule lang dyan, no, lahat ng phosphatidyls nasa loob ng RBC membrane or nasa internal surface except the phosphatidylcholine. Okay? And ano ang nagme-maintain kung sino ang nasa labas and kung sino ang nasa loob. Yun ay ang LCAT. LCAT means lecithin cholesterol acyltransferase, no? Nagta-transfer ng lipids to their respective location. Carbohydrates naman, ito ang nagde-determine ng blood type. Depende kung anong type ng carbohydrate. Kapag blood type A, meron kang N-acetyl D-galactosamine. Kung may blood type B ka, may D-galactose ka. Kung may blood type AB ka, meron kang both types of carbohydrates. And kapag type O, wala ka nitong types na to. And then, dito tayo sa stability of the membrane. Yun nga ang pinag-uusapan natin dito, yung protein content of the RBC membrane. So, sa vertical anchorage, it is also known as your transmembrane proteins or the integral proteins. Again, integral proteins para yan sa communication, no, between the outside and the internal environment of your RBC. It traverses across the bilipid layer, no, from outside going inside. Kaya vertical anchorage ang pangalan. And members of this type of proteins are your band 3 and glycophorins A, B, and C. Sa horizontal or lateral anchorage, it is also known as your cytoskeleton proteins or peripheral proteins. Again, yung peripheral proteins, it maintains the shape of the RBC. It maintains the biconcavity of the RBC. And, yun nga, no? It does not penetrate the bilayer, pero makikita lang siya across the RBC membrane. Kaya tinawag din siyang horizontal or lateral anchorage proteins. And under which, no, ito yung mga proteins na yan, alpha and beta spectrin, actin, protein 4.1, and ankyrin. So, para ma-imagine natin yung difference between your vertical anchorage and horizontal or lateral anchorage, yun nga, ang vertical anchorage, it spreads from your outer membrane papunta sa loob, no? Papunta sa, from internal going outside. So, vertical anchorage ang tawag. Kapag horizontal, it covers along the RBC membrane. So, yan yun, no? So, biochemistry muna tayo. There are 4 major biochemical pathways na nangyayari sa loob ng RBC. Unahin natin yung major biochemical pathway na Embden-Meyerhof pathway, PWS pathway. This is a type of anaerobic glycolysis which only happens inside the RBC. Bakit anaerobic? Dahil nga walang mitochondria or other parts of the cells ang RBC, right? And in this pathway, it provides the 90% of your ATP. And later, discuss natin anong importance ng ATP ba sa RBC. And then dito tayo, HMP or the Hexose Monophosphate, Shunt or PPP, Pentose Phosphate pathway. Dito naman, it provides the lesser amount of energy through aerobic glycolysis. And this pathway will provide glutathione. Glutathione is actually used for the prevention of oxidation of hemoglobin. It protects from free radicals. And yung important enzyme na makikita natin dito is your G6PD, which stands for glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase. Next naman, Rappaport-Lou-Behring pathway. This provides your 2,3-DPG, which regulates the oxygen release and binding of the hemoglobin. Mas maraming 2,3-DPG, mas nag-release ng oxygen yung hemoglobin. Therefore, ano ang rule natin dyan? 2,3-DPG is inversely proportional to the oxygen affinity. And lastly, your methemoglobin reductase pathway, which maintains the iron in ferrous state. Okay? Kailangan ferrous. Kasi itong ferrous state will also help in preventing oxidation by the free radicals. Okay, balikan natin si HMP or Hexose monophosphate shunt or pentose phosphate pathway. Again, a major enzyme is your G6PD. G6PD will convert your NADP to NADPH. And NADPH will convert your glutathione to a much more active form na reduced glutathione. And reduced glutathione ang kailangan mo to protect your hemoglobin from the denaturation or precipitation by oxidants and free radicals. Ano yung mga usual na mga yan? Antibiotics, no? Bacterial infection, and some foods such as your fava beans. Okay. Hemoglobin structure tayo. Halimbawa, itong major adult hemoglobin which is your age hemoglobin A1. So, sa A1, it contains your alpha and beta. So, kung makikita nyo mabuti, no, meron tayong 4 particles or 4 molecules of heme na naka-attach sa buong hemoglobin structure. So, ayun nga, to produce or to synthesize your hemoglobin, dadaan siya ng ganitong biochemical pathway. Okay? The first step of heme synthesis is actually the combination of your glycine with succinyl-CoA to produce your D-ALA. And ang enzyme dyan is your ALA synthetase. Yun ang importante, okay? And another important to take note is the last stage, no? Yung protoporphyrin to be converted to heme with the combination of your ferrous iron using ferrochelatase enzyme. Okay? So, yan yung important na step lang. Huwag natin memorize itong buo. The first and the last lang muna. Okay? So, dito naman tayo sa contents of hemoglobin. So, magkakaiba yung number in terms of or based do sa question. Kung ilan ang molecules ang pinag-uusapan, ang oxygen, 4. Okay? Kung ilang ml, okay? 1.34 per 1 gram of hemoglobin. Sa iron naman, pag atoms ang tanong, 4. Kapag ml per gram, 3.47. So, basahin natin mabuti, no, yung ating question. Okay? And then, for heme molecules, kanina sa picture, ilan ang heme molecules? 4. And 1, 2, 3 DPG. Okay. Para saan ulit si 2, 3 DPG? Para sa oxygen affinity. Ano ang rule natin dyan? 2,3 DPG levels is inversely proportional to your oxygen affinity. Okay, functions of hemoglobin naman tayo. Sa Rodak, no, sabi niya, it is a transporter of 3 molecules, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and nitric oxide, while in other books, oxygen and carbon dioxide lang ang minimension. Pero sa bagong version, no, kasama na si nitric oxide. Okay, dun muna tayo sa oxygen transportation function ng hemoglobin. And again, it will depend on the levels of your 2,3 DPG or in other books, BPG ang nakalagay. Ang BPG naman stands for the biphosphoglycerate. And to release the oxygen from the hemoglobin, 2,3 DPG must bind to the beta globin chain of your hemoglobin. Okay, sa beta siya didikit. Okay, kung ma-appreciate nyo tong picture, the difference between a hemoglobin carrying oxygen and a hemoglobin without oxygen. Okay? So, kung may oxygen ang hemoglobin, wala pa tong 2,3 DPG. Once na nag-bind si 2,3 DPG sa beta globin chain, marirelease lahat ng oxygen to your tissues. So, ito na yon. So, ang term dito is deoxyhemoglobin, walang oxygen molecule, oxyhemoglobin carries your oxygen. So next topic is oxygen dissociation and affinity. So before tayo mag-proceed dun sa mga shift to the left and shift to the right, balikan natin yung partial pressure of oxygen, which is termed as P50. P50 is actually has a clinical significance, no? It maintains the amount of hemoglobin na yung kalahati nun, kailangan magkikarry ng oxygen, o yung kalahati, walang oxygen. So, kailangan 50-50. Okay? Hindi rin maganda na yung lahat ng oxygen mo carries, lahat ng hemoglobin mo carries oxygen. So, ma-appreciate yan mamaya. Discuss natin yan. Okay? Para ma-meet mo yung P50, kailangan naka-maintain din or mayroon ma-meet yung homeostasis ng tatlong parameter. Kailangan na body temperature must be maintained at 37 degrees Celsius, yan yung average, blood pH of 7.35 and 7 to 7.45, your partial pressure of carbon dioxide of from 35 to 45 mm mercury. So, para hindi natin makalimutan to, tanggalin nyo lang yung 7 ng blood pH, yun na yung carbon dioxide. Okay? So, bakit kailangan nitong ma-maintain? Para ma-maintain natin yung 50-50 ratio of your oxyhemoglobin and deoxyhemoglobin. The normal partial pressure of your oxygen is at 27 mm mercury, or kung gusto natin na mas specific, 26.52 mm mercury. Okay, dito na tayo sa curve, no? Meron tayong tinatawag na shift to the left and shift to the right. Ang shift to the left means mas dikit si oxygen sa hemoglobin. Ang shift to the right, mas nag-release ng oxygen ang hemoglobin. Okay? Ang affinity ba ng oxygen to the hemoglobin when increased, is it a bad news or a good news? In some aspect, it is a bad news. Okay? Kasi ang primary function naman ng hemoglobin is to transfer your oxygen from the hemoglobin to the tissues na kailangan din ng organ natin. Okay? So, kailangan balance din ang affinity and release. So, ang normal na curve is supposedly nasa gitna, which is yung curve B. Okay? So, in what instances ng katawan or mga condition na nagpapa-shift to the left and shift to the right of the hemoglobin oxygen curve? Okay. Balikan natin. Ang shift to the left means increase ang affinity of your oxygen and your hemoglobin. And increase din ang pH. All other factors ngayon are decreased, such as your hydrogen, carbon dioxide, temperature, altitude, and 2,3 dpg. And in what instances pa? Meron kang mga dyshemoglobin or mga abnormal hemoglobin such as your carboxyhemoglobin, methemoglobin, and fetal hemoglobin. Dito, no, mas increase ang affinity ng oxygen sa hemoglobin. Okay? As in contrast with shift to the right, no, there's a decreased affinity, mas nag-release. And in what instances? Kapag decrease ang blood pH and kapag ang other factors are increased naman, no, opposite dun sa kabila. Meron pa, may mga instances na may anemia ka such as thalassemia or IDA, iron deficiency anemia, nagkakaroon ng shift to the right. Okay? So, ang tatandaan lang natin, no, left shift, increase affinity, increase pH, all decrease. Right shift, decrease affinity, decrease pH, lahat increase. Tandaan natin yung mnemonics na LIRD. Left increase, right decrease. Okay, HALDANE versus Bohr effect naman tayo. Nababasa nyo yan in CC, sometimes in HEMA. So, discuss natin. HALDANE effect, it talks about affinity of oxygen to your hemoglobin, releasing the carbon dioxide. No? Gaano kadikit si oxygen dun sa hemoglobin. And this HALDANE effect causes shift to the left on the hemoglobin oxygen curve. Okay? So, tanda lang natin itong mga mnemonics, no? HALDANE. Hemoglobin affinity to the oxygen causes release of carbon dioxide. And therefore, shift to the left. Sa Bohr effect naman, ang pinag-uusapan natin dito, no, the increase of carbon dioxide will release oxygen from the hemoglobin. So shift to the right. Okay, dito tayo sa parang mnemonics natin. Yung O ng Bohr, oxygen release from hemoglobin, and shift to the right. Balikan natin yung differences between oxyhemoglobin and deoxyhemoglobin. Aside from the presence of oxygen binding with the hemoglobin, ito pa yung mga differences nila. Okay? Biochemical structure, ang oxyhemoglobin daw ay in relaxed state or R state. In contrast with deoxyhemoglobin, tense structure daw or in taut state. In other books, ang T is for taut, no? Parehas lang naman yung meaning ng dalawang yan, no? Taut means rigid, okay? And then, ang pagiging R state ng oxyhemoglobin makes the affinity more or increased, and it will shift the curve to the left. And then, in terms of the levels of 2,3-DPG, lesser sila. Bakit kaya lesser? Kasi ang presence of oxygen in hemoglobin inhibits the glycolysis. Thus, lesser ang production or usage of your 2,3-DPG. In contrast with deoxyhemoglobin, no, lesser ang affinity with oxygen, and therefore, yung ating hemoglobin oxygen curve will shift the curve to the right, and then meaning mas marami ngayon ang 2,3-DPG present in this type of hemoglobin. Paano nangyari yun? Because the glycolysis is more enhanced, thus producing more 2,3-DPG. Dito tayo, carbon dioxide transport. The next function of your hemoglobin is to transfer or transport the carbon dioxide from your tissues going to the lungs to be exhaled. Okay? So, paano nangyayari yan? So, first, carbon dioxide will diffuse into RBC. Papasok siya, forming your carbonic acid using carbonic acid anhydrase. Okay? And this carbonic acid will be converted into lesser toxic materials such as your hydrogen and bicarbonate. Kapag dumadami na ngayon yung bicarbonate sa loob ng RBC, kailangan din niyang lumabas using an exchange or shift. Ang ka-exchange niya is your chloride. Okay? Kaya ang tawag is chloride shift. Lalabas ang sobrang bicarbonate out of the RBC. Okay? Papasok si chloride ngayon sa loob ng RBC. And kapag naman dumadami na yung hydrogen sa loob ng RBC, ang hemoglobin will be then converted into deoxyhemoglobin dahil marirelease niya yung kanyang oxygen. Remember kanina, as it increases yung hydrogen, it will release or it will decrease the oxygen affinity. Kapag naging deoxyhemoglobin na, no, libre na lahat ng ports, so doon na magbabind si carbon dioxide forming your carb-amino hemoglobin. So, tingnan natin yan visually. So, halimbawa, magpipick up ng carbon dioxide si hemoglobin from the tissues. Okay? papasok yan sa loob ng RBC. Using carbonic anhydrase, it will be converted into carbonic acid and further converted into bicarbonate and hydrogen. Kapag dumadami si bicarbonate, it will go out eventually from the RBC and chloride goes in the RBC. We call this process as chloride shift. Kapag naman yung hydrogen madami, it will shift to the right, no? And releasing your oxygen, calling it now as deoxyhemoglobin. Etong deoxyhemoglobin, madaming port na libre na. So, doon na magbabind ulit si carbon dioxide, forming your carb-aminohemoglobin, carrying it to your lungs. And that ends our first part of this session.